So welcome to the Helix webinar series. Today's session is on AIOps Unplugged, Roadmap to AIOps Adoption and Value. This is part 2. So for those that aren't aware that we did run a session, part 1 last week, I will be sharing that content if you missed it. And joining me today is Darius Wallace, our AVP Solution Architect of Customer Success. Joining him is Ash Malpass, a Solution Architect at Customer Success. And most of you may already know Yaron, who works with me closely on the AIOps series. Yaron Van, our Director of Product Management. So I'm going to hand over very shortly to Darius to introduce himself. But before I do so, just a reminder for those that haven't used Zoom, we do have the Q&A section of Zoom at the bottom. Please keep this interactive as we go through the session today. We will also be launching a poll towards the end, but we will prompt you ready for asking you for some answers. But we would love you to give us your questions, and I will be sharing last week's questions as well, so you do get the content that you may have missed. Other than that, you will remain muted until the end, so do keep interactive. And Darius, I'm going to hand over to you to get us started.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sam. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world joining this session. Welcome. As pointed out, my name is Darius Wallace, AVP Solution Architect, working with BMC for a while, primarily working in conjunction with Ash as we put together material and that helps provide a consistent way in which to deliver against a variety of our solutions. In particular, we've been spending a good amount of time focused on AIOps and working with customers and realizing value and getting the results they're looking for to support the business. Ash, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Ash Malpass, work alongside Darius. I'm a solution architect, and I've been working on defining and contributing to something we call a value path, which will be walking you through elements of that today, and hopefully giving you a few insights into success. Over to you, Ron.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Darius. And thank you, Sam. So welcome, everybody. My name is Yaron Front. I'm a Director of Product Management, which basically means I'm a product manager on the IT operations and AIOps side. I'm going to be on more of a supportive role today, but I do have another webinar series that we do about AIOps, and Sam's going to tell you all about that when we finish here. And with that, let's start.
Thanks, Yaron. So just as a lead-in before I hand over to Darius, Yaron's previous webinar was plugged in. This one is unplugged, so hopefully we'll show a little bit more in detail behind the scenes for adoption. And no further ado, over to Darius for the first slide.
Yeah, and just to build up on that reference, really it sets the stage for what we're going to focus on here. Being plugged in means that you've got the technology in place. We're talking about what you expect it to do, art of what's possible, all that great stuff. A lot of the things that we're going to be looking at in this session is, from the reference to unplugged, is what do you need to do before you plug this, before you plug the equipment in, before you plug the technology in, the things that are instrumental such that when you do plug it in, you get the results that you're looking for. So to that end, we'll kind of step into the first slide that establishes kind of the things that we recognize as going on in the market, going on in the space of different areas in the environment. And you have some shifts, some major shifts in the last 5 to 7 years around activities. Now, these things are probably pretty common, but they take on a different dynamic in this new world order of things that are going on in the environment. And we look at the demands that are going on within the market, the amount of data that becomes available now. People start realizing how instrumental and how valuable data is, and there's a wealth of it out there. And now tapping into that is one thing, but leveraging it and understanding how to take advantage of the connections between those pieces of data is really the key part of this. The infrastructure complexity has increased to enable higher level values, to tap into capabilities that support the new innovations that are happening in the market with regard to technology. And sometimes you make choices that meet a need today and then find another fit for purpose solution that needs to now tie into the first thing that you selected. So the complexity of the environment, just between on-prem versus things being in the cloud. And then when you look at the workforce, a lot of movement, new skills coming into play, other skills being shifted into other areas, and also looking at skills that aligned to the very technology that you may be investing in. So there's a lot of dynamics going on in trying to manage the opportunities and leverage the appropriate resources to support what's going on in your environment. Now, with all these things going on, these are just the nature of the beast. These are things that just happen on a regular basis. And the characteristics in the most recent years, we've noted have some of the effects that we see on the right-hand side. If the shift or the adjustments aren't made, you likely will run into the case where you have a degraded availability. That's the ripple effect. That ties into the fact that things are not connecting the way they used to, because maybe things that were done before don't work within this new within the complexity of the technology that is there, or the amount of data that's being brought available. New gaps are surfacing. There's an increase in support cost, which ties into you find yourself bringing more people on board to deal with the volume of information or dealing with the hyperactivity of things coming into the environment. There may tie into reduced visibility, meaning that the lens that you may have looked at your ecosystem before doesn't necessarily have the same fidelity in its view when you start looking at these new components that lens was not aware of to look at. So things are being introduced in the environment, and the means by which you monitored your environment or looked at your environment, leveraging reports, dashboards, or other mechanisms, may not have taken into account these new elements of information that's available in the different structures, be it on-prem, be it in SaaS cloud, or levels or details of information, or even the volume of information may go beyond the capacity of how we used to look at data before. And then there's the natural tendency of tool sprawl. When new things come on board, a lot of times there's fit-for-purpose solutions that are applied to that specific capability or specific representation that's introduced into your environment. So you may get that solution, but then there may be 2 or 3 others that come in and do the same thing, but has a slightly different angle or view as to understanding how that stuff connects together. And so, and then over time, as tends to happen, things start normalizing into a consistent way of maybe looking at or leveraging that data. And now you've got to figure out how to reconcile and consolidate into a more streamlined capability and solutions. So on the left represents what's going on. On the right, we're talking about some of the things that you may see that may impact your environment. And with all of those things going on, what we're offering is, how does AIOps step in to help mitigate some of those challenges? So to that end, we'll take a look at the key areas or the use cases that come into play. But one of the key points that we want to note here is, with all of these items going on that we just talked about, those tend to lead to specific challenges, specific problems. Information is overwhelming, or the way that information is rendered is not necessarily taking into account other data that may be available. These are challenges and specific problems in the environment. What's important, however, is you want to be very careful not to chase the squirrel. You want to be aware of it, but you want to understand how those ripple effects, how those tactical things that happen in the environment roll up to affecting the business. To that end, we put this in place, put this slide up to show that and emphasize that there's a certain number of business value drivers that you want to make sure you align to, because it's at this level that you end up making informed decisions. So the question is, how is it what we're experiencing ultimately undermining or affecting the business goals that we have? The 6 we have up here are just examples. Revenue generation, cost reduction, productivity improvement, risk avoidance, service quality. These are just examples. You may have your own, or you may have different ways in which you refer to them. So we listed here as productivity improvement. Others may refer to it as operational efficiency. So it's not so much being anchored on these 6. It's trying to illustrate or call out, make sure that you're also looking at things through the lens of how this affects the business, so that you can prioritize and emphasize how you approach addressing the right problems to minimize or mitigate that impact to the business. That's the ultimate goal. Now, with all that being said, let's kind of move over and start talking about the use cases from AIOps that contribute to not only addressing specific problems that are in the environment, but also we'll talk about, excuse me, how those use cases support those higher level value drivers we just talked about, we just referenced. When we start at the top, we look at observability. This is the first step in that path, in that value path that Ash referred to earlier. And it's leveraging ingesting information so that you have a holistic view of the data that's in your environment. Things, when I say data or information, it's referring to events, it's referring to metrics, it's information about the topological layout of the items in your environment. So having that holistic view is a key part of the ingestion activity, and gives us a view of to be able to observe in a more holistic fashion that information. When we look at service modeling, it introduces the ability to take that very information and put it in the context of things we care about. When we then look at noise reduction or service noise reduction, to be distinguished from event noise reduction, both are important. When we introduce service noise reduction, we're talking about understanding multiple items in the environment having an issue or a problem that are both related to a higher level service that is important to the business. So you need to make sure you kind of understand what that situation is relative to those different items, as opposed to chasing each one of those items as a separate issue. Going on to anomaly detection, that's focused on deviations from the norm. And we will acknowledge that what I did on Monday, even though the pattern for the past 3 months may have been a certain performance level of a certain resource, but on Monday we did a notable marketing campaign and we anticipated it. So the volume of information that's coming in, the level of resources that get utilized during that Monday through Wednesday period of the marketing campaign may increase. I say that example because not all anomalies, not all deviations from the norm are a problem. It's just letting you know that something has changed from what it had been doing before. In some cases, however, that it may be an indication of a problem. That's why it's important to take a look at this as a use case, because a lot of the effort is making that distinction between expected behavior and expected deviations versus deviations that require and merit attention. We can also take a look at root cause isolation to get in a better position to affect the mean time to detection. The sooner we can isolate and hone in on the probable cause of the problem, of the issue, it's more likely that we're in the position of mitigating it, resolving it, and getting the system that's affected back up and running. Automated remediation sets the stage for us to streamline efficiencies in not only confirming, using automation to confirm that the problem that is an issue is still an issue, to then maybe do some triage steps to gather information or take first steps at resolving the issue, for example, clearing the cache, but the issue still persists. Therefore, you would probably continue on with what you need to do, but at least that tedious task has been taken advantage of. Or if you pivot over to saying, hey, we're going to leverage remediation because for this one, this type of activity, I've seen this before, and I know how to solve that with zero touch. I can leverage automated scripts or capability or workflow to resolve that issue. And then finally, it can also touch into the area of communication. Once that element comes in play, leverage automation to let the appropriate people know what the results of your efforts were, what the results of the automated script was, successful or failure, and then allow the people side of the equation to act accordingly on that result. We also have a bucket in our reference of use cases referred to as advanced agents. This ties into our agentic AI and Helix GPT capability built into the foundation of the platform. And that allows you to have an experience where these advanced agents look at working at activities that maybe go across multiple practice areas. Now, we use the word advanced because there are agents, as referred to in Yaron's previous webinar, that are value add in some of these early stages. And those agents and the AI and the machine learning capability of the platform is available throughout all of these use cases. We've only distinguished these use cases because they tie into things that require maybe a higher level of investment, a higher level of activity, because they're touching into multiple areas, not just a single space. Or it may tie into our Agent Studio, which allows you to extend an existing agent or to create your own agent to be fit for purpose in your space. So we just wanted to make sure we classified that activity in a bucket in and of itself, so you can determine how you would like to invest and support investment in some higher level capabilities with those types of agents. And then there's risk identification. This is one of the more notable use cases that shifts you from reactive, even more from reactive to proactive. It's kind of addressing the point that if you keep doing this for another 3 days, you'll have a problem, or it's likely you're going to run into an issue. If you keep doing it for another 3 hours or another 3 weeks, so you can determine where you want to put that bar in place. All of that is to say is that you're now having an ability and a focus to determine how you act upon an awareness of something that is likely to happen based upon previous events. And then We did touch upon this also being these use cases, the top set that we just went through, being an on-ramp to other capabilities, which ties into capacity management. Now, with this consideration, and we go forward and look at the potential benefits of these different areas and some metrics that we've gotten back from working with many, many customers of outcomes that you can expect or look forward to. Again, let me be very clear about this. There are levels to this. Doesn't mean when you come in and start leveraging some of these use cases that right out the gate, you're going to get this result. It means that you have metrics in place and shows you the potential that we've seen in other areas. Now, let's understand and see these different use cases and touch on their interdependencies or how some lower level capability ties into supporting some higher level functions or higher level use cases. One of the key things that you want to note off to the left are what we refer to as our foundation use cases. We've talked about observability. We talked about service modeling. And what's important to understand is by bringing in the consolidated information, understanding and have visibility of that information, and then putting that information in the context of something or the things you care about, business services or technical services, is at the base of what higher level use cases will benefit from. It may be very clear. It doesn't mean that you can't do the higher level use cases without maybe doing as much investment on the foundation activities. But what it does is it undermines and potentially handicaps how much value you get from those higher level use cases if you're not focused on ensuring that you have the integrity of the data within the context of the things you care about in the early stages. So when the consuming use case leverages it, you get the results you're looking for. What's also very important to note is that on the foundation side of the equation, the things that deal with observability and service modeling, this is not a one and done activity. It is so important to understand that we want to have activities on day 2, day 3, and steady state that is all about focused on the ingestion or the quality of the data as it comes into the environment. That's an ongoing activity. The reason for this is because that's the time that you want to catch anomalies. You want to catch integrity issues. You may want to catch some items that have orphan items that are not associated to a model and deal with that as an ongoing steady state activity at the time that things come in. A lot of times customers may overlook that, make the connection, then just move over to a higher level use case. The problem with that is that if you don't put the people and process elements in place to maintain the information that's coming in, then when that issue shows up, when that data that is supposed to be there or be connected in a certain way is not recognized early, it actually will be recognized at the most critical time when you don't want to run into that, which means you have a critical situation going on. You're trying to get to the root cause of a problem. And because that data has an integrity issue, it may not feed into how you can isolate the problem more effectively. So you don't want to be resolving data integrity issues at the time of an event. You want to be dealing with them on a day-to-day basis to establish that steady state. So as we go from left to right, you'll see information about the service noise, anomaly detection, service noise reduction, anomaly detection, root cause, automated remediation, etc. And as we go forward, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this acts as an on-ramp to other capabilities. We talked and alluded to capacity, and what you invest in on the AIOps side has a direct result in supporting the practice and the other activities around capacity management. By the same token, the service ops initiative, which is really focused on interaction seamlessly between two practice areas, also benefits from what you invest in and how well you do in establishing capability in AIOps. AIOps supporting the operations side of the equation. Oftentimes the opportunity is to create an incident or create a record on the service management side. How that information maps over is a part of that service ops activity. So how well you do and qualify and bring in the appropriate information to populate information in another practice area is key. And so this sets and acts as an on-ramp to that higher level use case, or excuse me, in that other initiative, that higher level initiative of service ops as an example. So with that being said, we can also go forward. We put forth this diagram or the next diagram just to give you a little bit more of some references and detail around each of those use cases. So you kind of understand the purpose of them. When you get the slide deck, you'll be able to have the reference and not have to listen to 20 minutes of me talking about it just to figure out which of these and what details are associated with each of these use cases. With that, I'm going to pivot over and hand this over to Ash, where we'll start looking now at taking these concepts and understanding the bigger picture. gets back to our paradigm and our metaphor of unplugged, meaning that that we'll understand how things are tying into the use cases and how they support each other. But more importantly, we'll anchor and close with understanding how important it is to understand the people process capabilities in its support of the technology. Ash, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Darius. So for the next section, we're going to go through some concepts, and then we'll actually dive into more of a kind of how some of those use cases that Darius has talked about, how they kind of string together, and what are the implications, and what are the things you need to consider. So in this section, we're going to talk about, I'm going to focus on the importance of people, process, and data, in addition to technology. And when we look at the way that we do things traditionally, we're as techies, technology is what we're comfortable with. Okay, and we can look at problems that we encounter, and we can come to the point where we understand what the problem is, but essentially we're going to jump straight to the technology. And in tactical or strategic change, we can identify those readily, but going back to what Darius talked about with those market drivers and the value drivers, failing to consider the business goals can create a misalignment in your choice of technology, and it can either lead to partially solving the problem or to actually delivering diminished value, essentially. So what we're advocating is that there is this approach where we really need to understand what the value is, and what that means to the business, and essentially align those kind of drivers and understand them. And what this enables us to do is a number of things. First of all, when we align the actual solution of the technology with the value, it gives us a means to measure the success. So when we talk about these drivers up here, like cost reduction, what I'm referring to here is when you've deployed that, what cost is it reducing? What are you actually yielding from that? It also essentially gives us a means to ensure the solution relevance. So this is really confirming that the technology solution actually addresses the high priority business need, and it isn't just a technical solution looking for a problem. It also helps us to prioritize investment, so we have a clear understanding of how to allocate resources from the organization and budgets, which maximize the greatest strategic return. We also get decision making, which is really a framework for evaluating solution options, helping to trade-offs between implementation and anticipated benefit, and probably one of the most important ones, which is managing the scope and expectations, preventing scope creep, understanding the boundaries, keeping the focus on delivering value, and also getting that stakeholder buy-in. Because when we talk about some of the things like the people and like the process, these are things that sometimes are a little bit out of our scope of to influence, essentially. But when we do align the value drivers through to addressing the problem and selecting a technology, what we tend to find is that essentially what can happen is that you create a white space, essentially, and that white space is by jumping from the value to the problem straight into the technology. And we need to consider what other aspects are in there that we need to fill. So to summarize, considering value in decision making is key, but essentially a tech first approach can also lead to an imbalance in delivery. And we'll delve into that into the next slide. So if we take it on further, so technology that is not aligned to value will essentially fail to meet the goals of the business. But we need to strike that alignment, right? So as you can see here, the problem and the value drivers look like they're in a precarious balance here, where one could slide off and we get the failure. So when it comes down to it, if you're only going to be changing the technology, the adoption will be at risk. And this is where we talk about things like making sure that you have the stakeholder buy-in, making sure that your workforce is enabled, making sure you have a process, to run alongside the technology, and has been talked about in detail in the previous use cases, particularly in observability, ensuring that you have the data that's available. Okay. So the key really is not just about the value connecting to the technology, but it's also making sure that you've got, in order to support the adoption, that you have the alignment of the people, process, data, and technology. And in our experience, we see issues manifesting themselves in the technology, but when you delve into it, some of those key inhibitors to adoption are actually not within the technology itself; it's within these other areas. So what I'm going to do now is take us through a little bit of a sequence of events, so we can actually traverse some of those use cases that we talked about, and delve into a little bit and get an understanding of what are the technological aspects that are in play. Okay, so we're going to start with the concept of foundation. These are the key things that Darius referred to at the beginning of the value path, and essentially the first stage in that is observability. So to recap, this is about identifying and ingesting data, understanding what is going to be what level of data is there to support your consuming use cases, essentially. And to be clear, what we're talking about within AIOps are 4 key data elements: events, the topologies, metrics, and logs. And the method we use are a series of connectors, which will integrate with a number of different products, and essentially bring that data in and store it in a common data store within the Helix platform itself. And as it says here, that part of the process is essentially supported by Helix intelligent integrations. Now, we can bring that data in, but we really need to identify what is the data we want to see to begin with, and we need to have that understanding of what am I trying to achieve here, which use case am I trying to, which consuming use case am I trying to meet. And one of the things we can actually use for this is twofold, which is Helix dashboards itself. So simply by bringing in the data, we can already start to actually render some of that data and understand what we have ingested. But dashboards will also be a method of actually refining that data and actually presenting data back to your consumer. So it has twofold benefit there. And once we've got that, as Darius alluded to, there is, even in this process of setup and implementation, we do have AI functionality to support at an early stage with GPT, and that's essentially the agentic AI of Insight Finder, which fits into Helix dashboards. This essentially enables you to start to generate and render dashboard reports through natural language interface. So essentially, the agentic AI support can be available at a very early stage to assist you with this foundational step of observability. But observability is only the first stage. Coming out of observability, we want to get into modeling, essentially, and this is where we're taking the data that we've ingested, and the red arrow there essentially indicates that this is not just a one and done situation, even with ingestion, right? So what we're going to be doing is updating, refreshing that data as it gets brought in. And we're going to put it through a thing called service blueprints, which are essentially rule-based structures which are available, which are able to recognize certain technological or technical footprints and start to render those in a meaningful way. And that could be at an infrastructural level, or it could be from various different other application offerings. And those blueprints are a means to accelerate the construction of service models. And this is where we're actually applying the context of your environments, the components over here, the topologies, alongside the events, essentially. And this is a way of structuring those into a service, whether it be a technical or business service, essentially. And coming out of the modeling exercise, this is really it's facilitated and supported by the discovery product. So this is really about exiting with context. Okay. Now, what we then do and what we then look at are and that covers the foundational piece. We then move on into service noise reduction, and the clue is in the name, as Darius said. This is not event noise reduction. This is about working against those or alongside those service models, essentially to take those events and actually view them in the context of the models that you've built. And there's a couple of key things to understand here. Is that we generate what's called situations. So the situation itself is a correlation effectively across the service, and those could be within deep services or across separate services essentially. But the key important thing here to note is how that correlation functions and what is it dependent on. And there's about 5 key elements here with the situation calculation. There's the sequence of events of when events or situations have been generated. There's the time occurrence, and largely those can be configured within service monitoring, essentially, to give you that kind of let's call it letterbox view of when you want to actually generate and see these situations. But there's also some key data as well that it uses in order to actually perform its calculation to generate those situations, which is the CI, the message that could be coming from the event, and the topology, essentially. And essentially that is what's kind of behind the scenes to actually go ahead and generate that. So as you can see, some of those elements there are really going to be dependent on the quality of your data, right? So really just a highlight to say that, having a good concept and a good management of the data you're ingesting is only going to contribute to the effectiveness of what you're actually delivering within this use case. Moving on from service noise reduction, we then have the concept of root cause isolation. So this is where we then move on to the next stage, which is, okay, so I've identified things within service noise reduction, and I may have some indication of what I'm going to do next, but within root cause isolation, what you're getting is the system is providing you with insights in order to track and trace components within the service. What is the likely root cause of that outage, and the ability to see that within a topology, and to have percentage views to what is the most likely culprit. And again, we have AI functionality which assists with that, which is the Ask Helix GPT function, which enables you to converse and to get deeper insights regarding those specific situations themselves. So as you can see, this is a build-up of a flow, essentially, which only, and in this instance, we're only going to talk about root cause isolation. We're not going to go across all of the use cases that are in the value path, but it's there to illustrate what are the components. How do these different use cases build up, and what are the key technology aspects that you need to be aware of and to consider. And if we summarize this is the view of the focus of what what each use case does. Under observability, it's about understanding the consumers and the data. Modeling is about establishing the consumer view, and also establishing the consumer views and managing them. Modeling is about understanding the consumers and providing context by modeling services. And service noise reduction is managing the results and how do you respond. And then finally, root cause is to derive insights and potentially lead on to remediation. Okay, so Darius, go ahead, please.
There's one thing I also want to emphasize about this particular slide. It's probably notable that you see a lot of detail on the left-hand side with regard to that foundation stage of activity. If nothing else, you should take away from this the value of that foundation stage. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to invest and start from scratch with information there. You may be doing a lot of this already, but at least take that first step to assess the level of maturity you have in that space. Off to the right, we have a bit of a lighter representation of the actual higher level use cases of service noise reduction and root cause isolation. That doesn't mean that once you get into each of those use cases, you have a breadth of work that you need to do there based upon where you're starting and what your current level of maturity is. But within the context of our focus here, we're trying to emphasize and note how important it is for that foundation set of information to be at the appropriate level and make sure there's a clear line of sight to understand that that level of quality and integrity of what you bring in and having the context established and well maintained has a direct impact on the level of value you get from the other higher level use cases. In this particular example, service noise reduction, root cause isolations. The same thing would be true of the other use cases that we talked about.
That's great, thank you. And it's also worth noting is that, and one of the key things here is I think as Darius said, is to understand if root cause isolation is the target that you're trying to get to, just be mindful of how mature you are in the previous steps. Well, what we'll do now is we're gonna expand on this concept and then start looking at, whilst we've looked at the technology here, let's have a look at how the people, process, and data may align, or at least the things that you might need to consider. So if we move on, we have a similar view, okay, and we've got down here some horizontals here with the people, the process, data, and technology. Now we're going to run through some of these. Now, do not take this as being the the complete full list of what you need to consider. These are just flavors, highlights. There's more, but this is really just to portray how thinking needs to be aligned, okay, for adoption's sakes. So when we look at people, for example, one thing to consider is, as we mentioned before, within observability, understanding the use cases for the data itself. So if there is a wealth of data that you have which doesn't provide any value, then maybe it's not a candidate for ingestion, essentially. And what we're trying to do here is to streamline and give the AI the best possibility of having the relevant data rather than additional data that may not be required. But you've also got to take into account what the people are, what the consumers are actually wanting to see, and that really is a direct linkage back up to what the value drivers are and what you're trying to achieve. When we look at process, for example, we talked about the consumers. So there's a couple of elements to this. Demand management. This is really about engaging with your consumers. A process to reach out to the stakeholders, right? These are the people who are potentially seeking to get the value from business objectives, essentially. The other aspect to this is, on a more visceral level, when you're going through the process of actually populating that data, and that may be something that is iterative. You may take on, to build a service model, you may take on only one data source to begin with, and then add in additional data sources later on to mature your models and the level of data. Establishing some sort of process or work instructions to actually perform that ingestion to ensure that you're performing it in a repeatable manner is something that is to be recommended. And then one of the key ones for me, really, and we talk about data a lot, is, from an observability perspective, is the data source itself. First of all, you've got to understand where you've got the data, and then most important, really, in my opinion, is the integrity, the accuracy, and the entitlement. Do you have data that you want to ingest which has got holes in it, which is misleading, and do you even have access to it, because you may have some restrictions around it, whether that be regulatory or not. And understanding that and that's one of those direct linkages back to, again, the people in this instance and the consuming use cases, and that, as an example, could actually change the technology. So as you can start to see, when we come onto the technology, we're starting to build up this kind of interrelationship and an understanding of how each one of these vectors actually affects each other. And finally, obviously, the baselines are in there. You've got to understand, what your coverage is. Okay. When we look at technology to consider here, the stages here is, have I got technical access to it? Do I have the prerequisites for the connectors? Do I have APIs? Do I understand the URLs? And do I have user authorization in order to actually connect to that data and to bring it in? And the focus here, as we mentioned before, is understanding the consumers and the data, and also to establishing those views and to manage. But naturally, getting the observability pillar here as good as possible is the enabler for the follow-on use cases. When we look at modeling, there's similar kind of considerations, but we're changing the focus here a little bit, where we need to understand business services and consumer requirements. So when we talk about business services, again, this comes back to the element of people and the process about how you're engaging with your business and your stakeholders, because there's typically there has to be some kind of alignment with how you're actually going to be creating these services and so forth, and something that's meaningful to the consumers. When we talk about a process for modeling, we're going to not just the process of actually establishing the model itself, but there's got to be a life cycle in some form and a publication of where you're actually creating them, testing them, and then when you're releasing them and enabling them. And similarly, one of the aspects also is process for creating the dashboards themselves, who you're going to distribute them to, and so forth. Are you going to be using agentic AI, or are you going to be creating them yourselves? And then data aspects, again, alignment of the data sources to what the target is in your model is quite key. Understanding that is the target service model that you want to build. Do you have all of the data? Do you have accurate data which will build it for you? And we've put in this thing called a verified service model. And one of the things we found with customers is that even in the observability stage, one of the things you should be considering is to build a straw man model. It kind of fits in within the overlap between the people in observability and data itself. If you have a target of what you're considering a strawman service model to be, that helps you to start assess your data, right? To actually see where it fits in. And what you would hope coming out of the modeling phase is that you get that strawman model that you've created actually becomes a verified model which you can take forward. Other considerations under the data here is, are there any standards that you want to adopt for reports, how they want to look, and so forth. And then when we get down to the technological aspects here, these are the things that you'll be configuring, right? So service definitions, adopting the blueprints, understanding what they do, what coverage there is, potentially even creating them, creating your own custom ones. And then once you have that, there are higher level configurations to consider, such as event rules and health indicators, which we won't go into here, but probably delve into in a subsequent podcast or webinar itself when we dive into the use cases in more detail and a deeper dive. When we look at service noise reduction, the people considerations here are really when this is where we're getting the users to actually start to work with the data, is making sure the operators are enabled and the service owners are aware. When we talk about what do we do when we actually see a situation, you're going to want to have response procedures. Who do you contact within service management or within operations? And one of the things to consider also is to have a process, an ongoing process of actually auditing what's being ingested, what the models are actually representing, and ensuring that there are no gaps, because things change as we go along. Data changes, and it's really having a process to manage that cradle to grave of taking data from ingestion into it being rendered for use. Data itself. So at this point, you're actually within service noise reduction. This is at the point of where things have been adopted, essentially for active usage, in a more operational manner, rather than just the dashboards and the modeling and reporting that's probably inherent in the first two use cases. So in this instance, we want to understand how is this performing in terms of how it's being used, measurements of how much noise it actually is reducing. Efficiency metrics for actually to measure against the value of what you're actually getting from this. I don't mean metrics in terms of ingested metrics. I'm talking about the metrics against things like KPIs of how it's actually performing and what benefits it's having to the operations function itself. And yes, and the remediation of the data that actually supports those metrics. And then assessing the data that generates those situations at the AI level that we talked about on the previous slide. How well is our data footprint in terms of actually assisting in generating accurate situations. And then at the technology level, we've got the elements of the back end, which is the AI configuration itself, the time windows that you want to see the situations to be presented, and how often you want to see those situations themselves. That's more of a fine tuning more than anything else, but nevertheless needs to be considered. And finally, in the root cause isolation, we have the further extension, AI management skills, AI interaction enablement. Two things there really. One is getting your arms around the elements of AI you may be using for administrative and for refinement. Interaction with the end users. What is the best way to actually interact with the AI interface that you have? And again, one of the key things here is if you're using AI, you want to have some kind of level of feedback as to how well it's performing, rather than just simply, essentially, just taking what it tells you as gospel, essentially. And again, these all now start to relate to each other in a more kind of like combined way. Again, in this scenario, you're looking at, again, measuring the data to support root cause. You may be looking at what are the standards that I want to introduce about how the agents should be responding with things like prompts and skills and so forth. And this is, again, at the bottom here. This would how you would be configuring or adjusting them. So in summary, people is really about making sure you've got the available roles, making sure they're educated and enabled, ensuring that you've got buy-in, ownership, and stakeholder alignment to ensure that what is happening, what changes you're making are in line with their expectations and aligned with the value, the problems, and the business objectives you're trying to achieve. Process is really the thing that wraps around all of that. I would suggest to an extent. It's about having things like races which align those roles that we've just discussed, having process or work instructions or operating procedures which address some of those key elements across the process, and also as we touched upon in the couple of the latter two cases there, having that feedback loop, making sure that as and when you determine things that that you're encountering through operationally using them, that you have a feedback loop to actually address those and to plug them and to get the changes made to improve the service itself. Data is simply about getting a handle over what is the data that's in play here, how do I govern it, who's responsible for doing it, how do I adjust it, and understanding what is important, what is the data that I need to manage, and what does it contribute. And then finally, technology is, with all that taken into consideration, what is the architecture that I'm deploying here? Having that landscape to understand how it all fits together, how all of these other things are being used, but how the processes support it, where the data is connected, and what do I need to configure? So that being said, I'm going to hand back to Darius now for the next slide.
Yeah, so the key thing before we leave this one, I just want to anchor something.
Yeah.
Okay, as we left that one. Okay, now we're back to that one. The key thing that I want to emphasize from this is keep in mind the metaphor we use for this session. This is unplugged, right? These things that Ash called out, if you walk away with nothing else, understand that independent of whether this is AIOps, whether this is an implementation of change management, whether this is a deployment of supporting in incident management or rolling out a solution that may deal with another area such as service, other aspects of service management. What we're emphasizing is that this lens of people, process, and data is important, not only to ensuring that you are able to initially deploy the solution, but also ensuring that it continues to evolve over time. When that is not done, we have consistently seen that the technology it begins to degrade. Now, don't get me wrong. All technology, all software has its own challenges. Every organization has its different nuances and firewalls and other things that need to be accounted for. That still takes up an amount of time. The simplicity that gets introduced with installing and deploying the technology, the value you get from it, that's all still holds true. And you please go back and look at Yaron's webinar as the intro to this webinar. Those are all the potential things that you can gain, get huge value from. What we're focused on is independent of whatever you do for deployment, whatever solution that you're targeting, please do not overlook the importance of understanding the roles that are essential to supporting this on an ongoing basis, not having one person do 22 jobs, of which this is just one of their jobs, understanding the processes so that when something goes wrong, you have a means by which you have a repeatable process or a mechanism to solve it, or understanding the integrity of the data. As we pointed out, the volume of it is out there, but you got to understand, is it the right data that you need, and are the connections important? To that end, as we go to the next slide, emphasizing this point, we have a process that we take with regard to answering these broader questions for customer and their readiness to adopt the solution, to deploy the solution, and go beyond and go establish what's necessary to ensure that the technology, once deployed and installed, actually has legs to it, so that you go from initially maybe starting with crawling on the capability, then build up your maturity to then be able to walk at a certain pace to get things in place, and then being able to run so that you're able to aspire to where you want to be. So to that end, we have this structure of the matrix where you have people, process, data across, and technology across the top. And to the left, you have each of the different use cases that support, in this case, AIOps. We have the same paradigm, the same model that we use for service management, the same paradigm that we use for service ops or for other initiatives. And it's asking those questions within the box or within the focused area for observability. How well are we doing relative to the people that are going to support this particular use case? When it comes to looking at service modeling, how well are we set up as far as the data that we're bringing in? And is that data in the model also supported by the events that we're ingesting? So by filling out this matrix or going through this exercise, it allows you to triangulate on areas that you would want to put in place. And it has to be authentic. It's got to be a safe place where the people who are doing the work are in the position to feel comfortable with giving real answers about where things are, so that they can then have alignment to what they need to do. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see an example of one of these exercises that we've done with a customer. And is what we do on a regular basis as we get customers ready for making sure that they put in their plans activities that would benefit from an additional investment and shoring up resources. So you'll see that there's a meets needs, meaning that in a particular area that what's going on right now, we're pretty good based upon the level of maturity we're going to focus on. Room for improvement, things we need to do, and we think we can do a little bit better based on where we want to be. Failing to meet needs means, hey, we're doing some stuff here, but frankly, it's causing more problems than it's solving, right? And that's not a criticism. That's just a reality check on maybe we need to shift how we do things. And then a gap in capability. Yeah, that's an area why we invested in the technology, or that's an area we have no processes in place for this. It's all tribal knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to make sure that you had visibility to this approach, this structure. And as we leverage services, we do this on a regular basis to support teams and ask the right questions and act as a facilitator to help make decisions about where you want to plan out doing the right things to include in more than just installing the software and configuring it, but things you need to have in place to ensure it's successful in realizing the value that supports the higher level business goals.
So
with that being said, that takes us to the next step. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine. So we have a poll for you. So Sam, if you could fire up the poll for us. We've got four questions. Very simple, building on what Darius talked about. And we've got one for observability itself. So just to recap, we've gone through it. It's about understanding your data, understanding your consumer needs, and the ability to ingest it, okay, and to render it into something. So we've got four questions, and somebody will get, if anybody can guess what the four are, you'll get a prize. So the first one is people. If you could answer that one.
And I think they're all listed here, Ash, so they can go through.
We've got process,
Yeah.
and we've got data, and finally we have technology.
So this is an exercise just for yourself. It's anonymous. We don't know who you are. So you're just looking at your own environment and relative to just this one use case of observability, understanding of its importance around supporting the ingestion of information, supporting understanding a comprehensive consolidated view as opposed to swivel chair of data in different places. You'll be able to understand, do we have people that would be in a position to not only support knowing how to get that data or access, configure the system to get access to SolarWinds or Dynatrace or Splunk or whatever the mechanism is that you're going to bring data in from. Do we know who those contacts are? When that data comes in, if the data is incorrect, do we have a process for dealing with the data that came in didn't have the right characteristic associated with it? When you deal with the technology, do we have something that allows us to bring all this data in a consolidated view? So that's, examples of how you would look at this question and assess, hey, there's a gap here, there's room for improvement. We have people that are in place, but we could do better. Or frankly, we just suck in this area. We got to do more. Let me flag that so I know that we can invest in shoring that up. That's the lens you want to look through, and the intent is the best value comes from it when you are transparent about the reality of your situation. Otherwise, you're chasing something that just represents how you think it is versus how it is.
And I think that brings us to the end of the presentation with a minute to spare.
It does, and I did see someone asked a question about can we get a copy of the deck. We will be sharing out the last week's recording and Q&A and everything that was shared, and we will also be sharing today's stuff, so don't worry, we're not expecting you to remember everything. Thank you to those that have already filled in the poll. Keep putting your answers in. If you do want to be reached out by anyone when you have a survey and a thank you email come from me, if you can just fill it in and say you'd like to be contacted. I know we asked it on last week's webinar. If you're needing help with your AIOps journey, we've got Darius, Ash, and also Yaron. We'd be more than happy to help you. And what we've just been showing there, all those reference slides, really good content. If you've missed some of the webinars, you can click on those links. They will be sent out. And I'll also share last week's. I just hadn't put them on the slides today. The other final thing I just want to mention, if you can move to the next slide, Ash. For those that haven't got to some of the roadshows, we still got a few coming up. I'm not sure with the participants that have come to today's session if you're in a load of these different regions, but we have Riyadh coming up at the end of October. We've got New York, and I do recognise a few names in here that are in the US. We would love, obviously, to see you in person, as well as doing digital, which is great because it means we can get to one-to-many. There's nothing better than meeting people in person. So I don't know if Darius will be there, but certainly I know there's a few plans. Maybe Yaron will be there. Go and see our product managers and our team. Go and reach out to them. We'd love to see you in person. We will, of course, still be doing webinars, but face-to-face is much better. So those are the final dates that we've got. And then the next slide, I believe it's the Gartner slide. Yep. So you may, if you've gone to some of the local regional ones where I've been in attendance myself, had seen some of these slides or very similar. We work very closely with Gartner. Gartner Peer Insights are really important for BMC, or BMC Helix as we're now called. If you do have time, we'd love you to fill in this survey. It's not feedback we get until your details are published. So if you're successful and you leave a review, Gartner will send you a token gesture of a gift. We'd love to get your feedback, but obviously it has to be honest and feel right for you. But we have many different QR codes that we share out if you can share your feedback. I think that's probably, if I'm honest with you, Ash, all I'd want to say. I know we've got a couple of questions, and I would like to obviously answer those if people want to stay for a few minutes. So if you look at the Q&A, we do have one from Anupan asking a question. I'm probably not going to read it. It's a bit long, but I will find Anupan if he's still available, and I can see he's there. I've given you the ability to speak with us if you want to come off mute. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Hi, Samantha.
Hello.
It's just around the roadmap. I was asking a question like how, like what kind of release is happening, like how many connectors are coming every year. So because we can see there is a lot of products in the market, and customers want to integrate that with their AIOps and home solution. So
Yeah, so we're constantly expanding our reach as far as data ingestion and different connectors, and we always find it very useful, again, as product managers, to get direct input from customers and from from people who are interested in the subject. So if you can reach out either to us after the webinar, after Sam sends the follow-up email, or if you have a contact within BMC Helix, we'd love to hear from you about the specific technologies you're looking for, and
Okay.
to either tell you whether it's on our roadmap already
Mhm.
or take it into consideration to add it to the roadmap. So again,
Okay.
anybody on this call, that's a great way for us to get input. So I encourage
Right.
everybody to reach out.
And I would add to that, we're never done. We're never done. As Yaron points out, there's always things coming new into the market. Sometimes we're ahead of the curve, and things are in place. But at the same time, your input becomes valuable in us understanding and where we invest in those items. But as you can appreciate, things are changing all the time. So this is an active process. It's just not, hey, we're done and we stay static for a period of time. So please understand we have a
Yeah,
framework and an
that's
architecture
true.
to support that expansion.
That's true. Yeah.
I think we may have lost
Okay. I
most of the
think I'm
folks.
good. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we've got one other question, guys, if
Yes.
you don't mind, from Matthias. He was just saying, will Netrio be integrated to the AIOps themselves?
Is Matthias still on the call? Because there's a qualifying question I think that goes with that. And I don't know that he's still here.
Yes, he is. I can see
Oh, yes.
Matthias. I don't know if he wants to come off mute. Can you hear us, Matthias?
Yeah. Matthias?
I know
No?
sometimes people can't
So
always come
let me
off,
put out the
but yeah,
qualifying
maybe
question.
maybe after the
And
question.
we can go off. We can follow up offline.
Yep.
So when you say in the oh, sorry. Oh, no. Okay. When you say in the console, I just wanted to get clarity as to which which console that you're referring to, because in AIOps there's several interfaces, but also NetTrio is supported as a part of one of the ingestion channels to bring information in, and then its results are rendered in our console specifically for events. So NetTrio is one of the sources for out of the box connectivity for ingestion. And therefore, when you say in the console, it's not so much NetTrio in the console as much as it is the information from NetTrio being rendered in the console, which will be the case for any of our data sources. That data comes in, and then the console is the unified view to see all that information. So that's why I wanted to get the clarity about representation in the console. The data from NetTrio is there, and we will continue to expand what data that is being done from NetTrio. If you go back 8 months, there was only, I think, events, and then it's expanded to now recently, I think, metrics, and there'll be some other information as we continue to evolve our integration and tie into NetTrio.
Thank you, Darius, for answering the question. And hopefully, if Matthias, if that doesn't answer or you've got any further questions, I'll touch base with you after the session today. I was just about to say we'll close because we're already over, but I'll take this last question from Sharabi, if that's okay. Does Change Risk Advisor use ML for prediction, and what are the available configurations to enable the predictions?
Yes, and good question. I know, Ash, you've looked at this a little bit, and along these lines, yeah.
So
I enjoy. Go ahead, Ash.
Change Risk Advisor is really about ensuring from an operator's perspective that essentially the change records, and in fact it's not just like change requests, there are other types of tickets that, such as work orders, that can also be factored in, are actually seen in the context of situations essentially. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those use cases that is really more based around getting the data share and data integration between AIOps and ITSM itself. And then from there, it's GPT to and the Ask Helix GPT elements to essentially draw the insights and associate those changes with potential situations within services. Essentially, I'm not sure whether that answers, but we can probably get a more accurate answer in response.
Can you hear us, Sarabi? I've seen that you've taken yourself off mute. Can you hear us? Don't know if they've connected via the browser. If you could maybe respond, maybe I'll follow up if you've got any future questions, because I think maybe your connection's not working. Hopefully it's answered the question, Ash, but if not, we will follow up. I think based on time, because we've overrun, and apologies for keeping everyone on a little bit longer, but I had a feeling when I get the trio together, we knew that we had to split this into 2 sessions, and I'm sure we could even talk more. We will be having future webinars coming up around these subjects. We've got a lot of use cases to discuss, and I don't know, Darius and Ash, we were talking about it before we joined this session. Do you want to just give a bit of a insight of what we're planning? Because I think it's always interesting for people to know. But we are planning future sessions and also podcasts.
Yeah, gladly for those who are still here, just the things to look forward to. You look at each of those use cases. We listed about 8 of them out there: observability, service modeling, service noise reduction, root cause isolation, anomaly detection. This is a test to see if I can do them all from my memory. So we're going to not test that any further. But each one of those use cases, we're going to look to do a podcast and not only talk about the concepts that we presented here, but we're also going to be having a guest for each one of those use cases that were involved in the field in the direct implementation. Were it not myself or Ash, who have the concepts in place and actually support the delivery with customers, but also bringing in other resources that have deeper knowledge or expertise or firsthand experience and looking at their experience in those use cases. So we'll have a podcast for observability focused on that. We may even follow that up with a webinar that goes to the exercise that illustrates further about observability capability. Same thing can be said for service modeling, for service noise reduction, for anomaly detection, root cause isolation, automated remediation, advanced agents, and risk prediction. See, so I passed the test because those are the primary ones on the primary line of our subway diagram. So that's what we look forward to: podcasts in each one of those areas, and in some cases, webinars that follow up and give you visuals to what we talk about in those podcasts.